Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Confident podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Richard. Richard, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Richard Flentge. I'm a former co-host, the US-based webcast YouTube show, Electric Vehicle Television. It was known around the world as EVTV, and we produced about 500 different webcasts talking about converting gasoline cars to electric drive and then also applying batteries to the solar technology.
Okay, fantastic. And you've recently written a book too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I wrote a book. It is Verities of an Electric Mule. And, there's all people have all different roles to play in, I think, this mission of solving some of our renewable energy needs. I look at it as sort of a cultural bridge. I'm trying to really reach the mainstream. I have some humor in it. I have a lot of technical tips, a lot of anecdotal stories, but really the mission of the book is to try to sort of bridge the gap between the people that really don't understand about this technology and the people that are really into it. So that's sort of the mission of the book.
Okay, fantastic. And you talk a lot about going off grid with solar and battery
Yeah.
microsystems. A, why, and B, how? I mean,
Okay.
A, why do you care about people going off grid? What's the purpose of that? And B, how do you do that? Because there's not a lot of people still today, despite the advances in the technology, who
Sure.
manage to do that.
It is a technical challenge. The reason you go off grid, there's one is that it reduces the power load required from normal power generation plants. So, as on a micro scale, a lot of us that reduce the amount of electricity that is needed through microgrids, through developing their own power plant, will actually, in a seedling sort of way, begin to reduce the need for the carbon based fuel. So, the microgrid and the individual user of electricity, I believe, is really the key to reducing greenhouse gases, reducing emissions, and it is the challenge for a lot of people to
Mhm.
sever themselves from the utility system, and it's very free. And that's, I guess, one of the main arguments that I will tell you that I've gotten from feedback is that owners of electric cars and owners of microgrids, if they make one comment, is that they don't have to go to the gas station and they don't get a utility.
Yeah.
So those are the big reasons. Now, on the technical side, it is not. It is not you got to have some smarts. You got to have a really good tool set, and you have to have some risk taking abilities. So it is, and money at this point, I suppose. It
Yeah.
requires gas. And now there are systems here in the US that are turnkey, except they are a high dollar. You know, if you got
Eye-wateringly
the
expensive.
right. And we were, and one thing that's interesting about us, we were kind of like outlaws. We were like American hot rodders. We bought an inverter from China. We half wired up our controllers. We soldered and crimped our cabling and hodgepodge together, basically a microgrid. And that's what I operated for a long time. And that's how I got my experience in it.
Okay. But I mean, I have an electric vehicle. I have solar panels on my roof, but I'm not off grid. I don't have storage. So on cloudy days here, for example, I
Mhm.
don't produce enough electricity to power the home. Overnight, I don't have any electricity generation because
Okay.
it's solar power. Even On sunny days when I'm producing at full, there are times when my electricity requirements are greater than that's produced by my solar panels. So how do you overcome those kind of challenges and go truly off grid?
Okay. The first thing would be a very big bet. And the obstacle to that is basically the price per kilowatt. So if you would say your home overnight would use 18 kilowatts, okay, that means you have to have an 18 kilowatt or bigger battery. The current price of a kilowatt of battery storage is about $1,000. And it's
Well,
even come down a little bit. Now we repurposed salvage batteries that were out of wrecked Teslas, and the price was still $500. So as batteries get on scale, and if the price gets down to $100 a kilowatt, or at least under 200 kilowatts, and that's what I really write in the book, when it gets on scale to where a pragmatic person, a person that makes decisions based on what's in their wallet, when the pragmatic buyer can get into it, that's when the big change is going to happen. And I believe that is going to happen. On scale, if you look at the complexity of some of the machinery that we build, when this gets to a battery scale, the price per kilowatt will come down. Now, the
okay,
second answer to your question, is you have to have very smart controls in your home.
right.
And that would be, if you want to hear sort of the anecdotal story, we decided to make the move to go to off grid and develop a microgrid. So, being country boy and hot rodders, we put together this giant battery. It was 100 kilowatts,
Well,
and we had the parts to do it. It was a huge battery. And by golly, that thing still ran out of juice and we still had problems. And the big battery alone didn't fix it. So we ended up having to get different switching put into our utility panels so we could
right.
switch on and off things. And then we also had to get a current sensor that started determining what our loads were and when they were happening. And until we knew that information, just having a big battery or having solar fell short. And the way it fell short is you'd come in the morning and flip the light switch and nothing would happen. You would be in the dark. And we were like, why did this happen? Because all our math did not add up. The loads did not add up to what we thought would pull the capacity out of the battery, but it did. That'd
Well,
be the other lesson I suppose I would share with you. The rated, the calculations, and the real world, there was a gap in between. Yeah.
and you also, I mean, to fill a 100 kilowatt hour battery, you need a big solar array as
Mhm.
well, because I mean, I've got 18 panels on the roof producing 5 kilowatts. So to get that up to producing enough to fill a 100 kilowatt hour battery, eh, I don't know how many panels you'd need, but you'd be talking, 30, 40, 50 probably.
It was 16 kilowatt array right above,
Okay.
directly above. And then we put in a secondary 14 kilowatt array. So the facility, we had 30 kilowatts total. And we had a monitor system. And that was actually one of the things that I contributed and had a lot of input on. We had a monitor and a dial. So you were always watching your solar output, your state of charge of your battery, and what those numbers were. So you would watch and you would see how much kilowatts you were producing, what was going into the battery, and what was this voltage, what was the state of charge. So yes, I write a little bit about it in the book, but you kind of it's sort of a little bit of entertainment, and it's also
Hmm.
a bit of utility. But you pay attention to your numbers and your output and what your battery's at. And a group of people that we sold product to were also the sailboats.
All right.
People on big sailboats do the same thing. Basically, they have solar panels, they have a lithium battery bank system, they have inverters, and they really pay attention to what's going on because running out of electricity or the real danger is actually drawing your batteries down too low.
Right.
So you have to have pretty stringent discharge cutoff and controls because you could completely discharge a lithium ion battery and then it becomes a brick. So
Okay.
you're watching what's going on.
Okay. It reminds me very much, I gotta say, Richard, of the stories of the early days of Silicon Valley when people were putting computers together from
Yeah.
baseboards and hacking everything
But
together, and you had clubs doing it. And, when you
yeah.
compare that to what we have now with, smartphones with, I don't know how many
Mhm.
orders of magnitude more compute power in your smartphone now than these extremely primitive computers that people were building in clubs together back in like the 70s and 80s, you know. So is that the kind of evolution you expect to see in this space
Yeah.
as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. That is it. When the microprocessor gets on scale, it can it will develop what circuits need to be on, what circuits need to be off, what devices need to be on, what devices need to be off. Do you need to connect to the grid for a while? Can you stay off the grid? As well as even a larger scale, when to use your car, when it's yes, that is basically when the technology comes that can make all the switches, can make decisions, turn devices on and off. Yeah, this will be very similar to operating your smartphone. And you look at the scale of what they've done once they started to produce it.
And I mean, I have a 64 kilowatt hour battery. It just happens to be in my car.
Mhm.
Should I have to buy a second battery to stick on the side of the wall of the house? Or do you think there'll be people have been talking about vehicle to everything, vehicle to
Yeah.
grid, vehicle to home for the longest time. And we still are not producing cars en masse that are bidirectional in terms of their charging.
Yeah.
There are a few. I think the Ionic EV5 or 6, not Ionic, the Hyundai EV6, I think, or
Oh,
5. I can't remember, to be honest. I think there were one or two out there. I know the F-150 Lightning, for example,
uh-huh.
is bidirectional. I don't know if it has enough juice going back out to power a house. I know you can do things like plug in chillers and things like that, but
Yeah.
are we going to get there in terms of
Yeah.
using your car to do it? Or
Yeah.
will you have a separate one from your home, or will it depend?
Yeah. First off, the big answer is your car battery. The when you really scale the pragmatic buyer, the car and the battery has the purpose. You get transportation. They're already making that big investment, and it is a very simple fix to go to your house. Some of the obstacles in some ways have been the anti-islanding and the pushback from utility companies.
Hmm.
Because when you hook up a power source to a home, it can backfeed into the utility grid. So the one piece of technology that will be needed is a very smart utility box that as you if you would come in with your bidirectional and you switch in your battery, you would shut off your utility grid. And there are some companies in the US that are really coming up with this. One of them that I'm big on is called Stan. He's an offshoot of Tesla, and they have smart utility boxes or breaker boxes is what we call them in the US. But one of the obstacles really has been the safety and the pushback from utility companies.
Okay. And is that is that them just trying to protect their income, or is it a valid concern, or is it a mixture, or, where
It's
does it lie there?
all of the above. They know it's number. I follow, some of the grid, little internet stuff, and the utility companies they're trying to get their hand in the middle of this. And there has not been that I'm aware of anyone electrocuted by a solar system that back feeds into the grid. Now, an example would be it's highly regulated. In our market, we had to put an outside switch that was available to the utility worker. So if they came into that area, they could physically switch off our solar system from
Wow.
their access point. So it's a concern and not a trivial one, I'm sure. But the answer will be in a way that you can switch off and isolate yourself from the grid.
And I know in most of the regions of the US that the utilities are often regional monopolies, as opposed to here in Europe, where most of the markets are liberalized, and so you have healthy competition between utility companies. I would
Yeah.
have to suspect that in a situation where you have healthy competition, it would probably be in the utilities' interest to say to the customers, you want to go off grid? Here's a whole system for you. We'll rent it to you and maintain it for you over the next 20 years at X euro per year. And we'll do the installation, we'll manage it for you, et cetera, et cetera. And I know, for example, if I go on some of the utility companies here in Spain, they actually offer that service. Are any of the US companies doing anything like that?
They offer big tax rebates. So you
Right.
can get, and they started that here in our state. We did take advantage of it. I was a part of the application process, and then it sort of dried up. A lot of people used it, but in America, we offer tax rebates. But they are regulated. They have, and going into the utility business, it is a mess. Nobody really knows exactly what's going on in the utility grid. It is a very complex system. They pump a lot of electricity into it. It has a lot of power loss, transmission. It's just a difficult thing to get a hold of. And I would say the attitude here in America is they're kind of like, listen, we got this thing working. Do not touch it, please. They don't want. But the real truth is there's a tremendous amount of energy loss in that grid. And breaking apart the grid with microgrids and large, stable battery banks as reservoirs is
Hmm.
going to gain efficiency into the grid system. So that's kind of what's coming.
Okay. And what do you think of instead, or as well, maybe depending on the area, of individual unit based microgrids that you maybe have community microgrids? You see
That's
that as,
exactly right.
yep.
That's two different things. And that would be, again, one of the conclusions. I don't see just a whole lot of people putting a mini power plant in their house. And if you don't have the right sun and the angle, if you're at the wrong latitude, so a solar community, basically you would put up 300 or 400 kilowatts, maybe even 1,500 feet from your home or a mile away. You could simply take your portable battery on wheels, your car. You could go to an isolated solar battery bank. You could refuel your car. You could go home, plug into your bidirectional system, go through an inverter, and power your home. So yes, the probably in reality, a solar hub, a small solar community is a much more realistic answer to
Right.
getting a whole lot of people off of it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And similarly as well here in Europe, the one of the energy companies in Austria, for example, runs community solar plants where they sell panels to individuals. So they say, give us €1,000, you'll have a panel of your own. We'll do a revenue share with you from the production of that panel over the next 20 years. And you will, if you put that €1,000 in a bank, you would earn X amount over that 20 years. But from the production of this panel, you'll actually earn Y, which is greater than X. And so you're better off giving us the €1,000 and owning your own solar panel, and we'll give you all the stats and all the money coming from that solar panel. And they've done that, and they've sold out 25 solar parks in less than 24 hours each by offering that kind of service. And it seems, for me, it seems crazy that the US market hasn't liberalized and become innovative in the same kind of way that we're seeing here in Europe.
Well, first off, that's a very good idea. And I'm going to
Mm.
remember that suggestion. And next time I get a hold of somebody that knows anything, I will bring that up. And yes, getting those things out and help subsidizing the grid is the direction to go. And the solar hub is it. So that's a good idea. I remember that, Tom. That's actually a pretty good one. I hadn't heard that, so I learned something here today. And
Excellent.
that's really part of my communication mission. How do I make this stuff sensible? How do I make it pragmatic? Because people dropping $30,000 on the battery and $40,000 on solar panels, and I just don't see that happening a whole lot.
No.
They will spend that on a car.
Sure.
Well, their car's got the battery. They can go and plug it up.
And what about the software and the various technical bits and pieces, the inverters, the switches, all that? You mentioned that there's one or two companies that do full Keystone solutions, but
They are
how far away are we from a, I don't know, an Apple, for example, of energy, where you just go to your nearest, in this case, Apple store. It's not going to be Apple, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
the equivalent, and say, I want a grid, and they say, sure, here's the box. We'll send an
Yeah.
installer. It'll be done tomorrow, whatever.
I would say the technology is here, but right now it is priced for the cream of the crop. So you are looking at the company that I follow, and I like their system. Is called Span, and they have the smart box that turns on and off your circuits. It may, for example, it can, if you've got enough solar panel, it can switch off everything else, and your solar panel energy can flow directly through. There's no, and it makes all the switches automatically. It keeps history. And then there are several wall hanging, the Tesla wall. They have two or three competitors. They modulate it. Usually it's around 10 kilowatts, a battery that you can just hang on your garage wall. The bidirectional charging has not really moved very far. I have seen some of it advertised, but I would say, again, the technology, at least in the broad scope, is here, but it's not appealing to the everyday person and the pragmatic buyer. It's the elites right now that are getting it. But
Yeah,
it is working.
and you do still have to kind of buy it piecemeal and cobble it together, or get an installer to cobble it together for you. We're still quite a bit away from just getting a box delivered
Exactly.
and containing everything, and you're good to go now.
Exactly right. And that's kind of the humorous line I say is you can't go to the hardware store and buy something like a refrigerator and come home and and you can't really, the same thing with solar panels. You still kind of got to fiddle with solar panels, and you have to string them together. You have to get them combined. You have to get them into a inverter that matches the voltage, and then you have to get from the inverter to your fuse box. And one of the things that I described, and one of the concepts we really came up with, was a solar panel that was all integrated. So you would just have the panel, the framing structure, your inverter, and your battery, just
Yeah.
all in there, and two wires coming out the other side. So that's one advance that I would like to see would be a much more usable, just as you described, an off the shelf system, at least in a solar panel.
And why aren't we seeing that?
I think they're barely keeping up. It is complex, and and there was a saying in the computer industry, and it was called the Osborne effect. And the Osborne computer kept saying how great their next computer was going to be.
Yeah.
So people didn't buy the computer that was out there. And I think some of this solar stuff gets wrapped up in that, and people think the future is going to be so much better. But if we don't provide them with oxygen, if they cannot have funds to develop, we're going to sort of spin our wheels a little bit. It's close. I'll tell you that it's close.
Yeah. Yeah. What about for businesses? I mean, sure, it's challenging for homeowners in terms of cost and piecemealing it together. Businesses surely have a greater incentive in that there's greater demands now in businesses to be carbon neutral, and generally they have deeper pockets too.
Yeah,
So do you see them rolling these things out more, likely to go off
yeah,
grid or at least have resilience and security of supply?
yeah. No, we are having those. The microgrids are popping up in the U.S. They're really few and far between. I mean, a large factory roof is ideal for the
Mm,
solar array. They have a lot of space for large batteries. They can cover their parking lot with solar panels and
yep.
provide shade, and then employees could come in and park their car and charge their batteries while they're working. There's a tremendous potential there. There are companies, and I follow a little bit of it, and you read about them, but they're few and far between. I mean, there's just not, and that's, I suppose, the way it's going to progress. It's going to be
Yeah.
onesie twosie.
You got to think
But
retail outlets are an obvious one because
yeah,
a lot of them have large car parks. I know that in France, they recently passed legislation requiring retail outlets to put solar panels on their car
yeah,
parks. So
yeah.
that, as I say, that is an obvious one. There's nothing happening like that in the
Or
US yet, no?
yeah, a little bit. Again, they've done one large parking lot here at a university close to me,
Oh,
and
cool.
if it's reached the middle of the U.S., that should be your signal that it's probably penetrated a lot of the world, because we are as far away from the coast and as far away from that. The West Coast certainly is sort of the technology hub. The
Mm.
East Coast, it's kind of the government hub, and we're out here in the hinterlands, the boondocks, or whatever. But if it's reached us, yes, the concept is certainly catching on.
Okay. You
So,
talk a lot about batteries as well. What are some other interesting applications of batteries, do you think?
well, in terms of concept, I'm very hip on a distal battery. So something that I talk about is that you could change over some of your appliances, okay? And you could have a battery at the appliance. And then you would have, instead of having one large battery, you would have a very focused battery on just one particular circuit. Or you may just have a battery just for your light system. And then you would have batteries for your lawnmower, batteries for other devices that are very easily charged. They don't have the mass capacity of a big battery. So I call them distal batteries in the book, but I
Hmm.
think a distal or isolated circuit batteries, there's probably another huge application and a huge future concept that just hasn't settled in people's minds. I mean, we see it in lawnmowers, you
Yep.
know,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you're
yeah,
just that thing, same thing that happens in a lawnmower can happen for every single electrical device there is. So
yeah. I see it
I'm
locally
hoping,
here with leaf blowers.
yeah,
So leaf
yeah,
blowers are nasty, smelly,
yeah,
loud devices. and our local municipality is now giving its workers electric leaf blowers with battery
Yeah.
packs. So they have a little battery backpack and they're going out blowing the leaves with these electric blowers, which are quiet and not smelly and still do the same job. It's a joy to see. So that's pretty awesome.
And that again, that's pragmatic. It
Yeah.
works. And those batteries could easily be recharged at a small solar hub and be completely free, not requiring any fossil fuels. But that same application has 1,000 more uses. You could have all your lights and your computers on a circuit with a recharged battery, or your television, or your refrigerator, your washing machine.
Mm.
So I would predict or prognosticate that that will be the next trend here, and it may take a while because the world is they're doing all they can to keep up right now. But I would say distal batteries as a whole is going to be a huge application.
Interesting. Interesting. Cool. Okay, Richard, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
I think the big one that I do want to talk about is solar trains and the coal train. And
Okay.
that is an issue that I live with here. I live very close to a rail line. So I get to hear and see coal trains, which are about a mile long, traverse my
When,
landscape.
when, just to clarify, Richard, when you say coal trains, you mean these are big diesel trains carrying long carriages of coal, not that they're coal powered.
Yeah, they are flat snakes that are about a mile long, 135, 150 cars
Right.
packed to the rim with coal. Now, also in the US, we run the coal trains from Wyoming all the way to the East Coast. So the big takeaway is if we built battery cars, if we
Hmm.
built cars you could fill up with electricity, say in the southern portions of the states, in the lower latitudes where you had great solar, you could simply take a train and you could transport 150 batteries to a municipality
Right.
and fuel them. And you wouldn't have to have the solar built right next to it. You can have the solar in another geographical location, and the solar train and the batteries could move electricity. And that is, it's already being done, in a way. And they just roll a train one direction, they switch the locomotive to the other end, and they go right back to where they came. They fill it back up and they go right back out. And that concept of moving energy is just a perfect application for a solar train. We could get big batteries on a rail car, I think, pretty simply.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a guy called Michael Barnard on the podcast a few weeks back, and he was proposing that the US train system should go electric, and saying he wasn't quite saying 150 cars of batteries, but he was saying you could at least have one car be a giant battery. And so when
Right.
times when the
Yep.
trains were going through tunnels or things like that, where you couldn't have overhead wires, you could then just use the battery if it was a long tunnel to go
Yep.
through that, and it would be completely seamless, which is, stuff which is happening already in other jurisdictions. So fascinating. Cool. Richard, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Okay, I have a basic website. I show some of the technology, richardflenge.com, and I have the book for sale on there. I'm on Twitter. I do blog a little bit and I have fun with it. I am retired. I'm not a part of a company. I'm just a individual advocate. I'm very passionate about it. Any support, any following I can get is always appreciated. So they just go to my website and they look at some of the stuff. Some of the more interesting things I've done is we at the shop, we repurposed the Tesla batteries. So we took
Right.
apart Model 3s, and I have a couple little inventions and designs with repurposed Model 3 batteries. Kind of shows that you can take this stuff and you can repurpose it. So they can just follow me, and I'll keep on being out there. It's not something I really enjoy, and I'm very passionate, and I certainly believe it's the direction that's going to save the future for us.
Sure. Sure. Shoot me those links in an email, Richard. I'll put them in the show notes,
Oh,
and that way everyone will have access to them. Cool.
absolutely. I'll get them on over to you.
Fantastic. Richard, that's been great. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Well, I certainly enjoyed being here.